Okay, you've been oriented into this day and into this season of church season, I guess it is, of preparation for Easter. So I'll start with this. As Jesus sets his own face towards Jerusalem and heads into a confrontation that he knows will test his will and his way, we get to take something of our own journey through time and the Bible. Every week now until Easter, we'll be asking ourselves, what do we know about love when it's the love of Christ? Just what does that look like? What does the Bible say about it? And how far do we believe love will go? We started last week with this famous parable from Jesus. It's worth mentioning again. It's about a Samaritan who helped a Hebrew man who'd been ambushed, beaten, and left for dead on the side of the Jericho road. In that story, love went past inconvenience. Love went past its original mission. Love went into the realm of personal risk. Love went past enemy status to reach a need. And in love's example, Jesus was saying, the people who deserve to be called our neighbors are not just the ones like us, not even the ones literally next door to us. They are the ones we grow up distrusting and judging, the ones we grow up separating ourselves from, the ones we're taught to hate and believe also hate us. Today, I have a few more thoughts on how we can live into last week's parable's command to love even neighbors whom we know as enemies, because that is not easy work. And when Jesus says, go and do likewise, he didn't tell us how. So knowing that we should do it doesn't necessarily always mean we can. It doesn't always help us get something done. Just because we know, we don't always live out. And I'm going to give you a very small case in point, illustrated easily by the internet, where I found dozens of photos to illustrate this small case. Many of us in our homes have bought containers to hold the dirty clothes. And almost the very same number of us will say that the clothes sometimes appear on the floor next to the containers. Very often, they will be right outside the hampers, right outside the doors. They miss the bins, the baskets, the containers. Our people we live with and love, they know what to do with the dirty sock. But knowing what to do with the dirty sock does not ensure a house without dirty socks in places dirty socks do not go. That is all to say, we are all only human. We need lots of reminders. We need encouragement to try and try again when we get pretty close to the mark, but kind of miss the point along with the laundry basket. So I have some things we need. I found them in a letter, ostensibly written to a young man named Timothy, and I have to take just a minute or two. I would say I need 90 seconds to set this letter up before we read from it. Okay, it originates 2 generations after Jesus died, roughly 60, 70 years. So by now, there is an early church, as well as individuals who knew Jesus and were touched by Jesus directly. There's now a church with a church culture that is, as ever, up against opposing different kinds of cultures. The church is up against the pull of the world's ways and the world's values that would conform Jesus to whatever is the norm at the time, whatever is the reigning power. So what would be really helpful for people of that early church is to hear an authoritative word from a founder of what they're trying to do, of what they're building. So enter this letter, written as if it's from the Apostle Paul. It says it is. Most modern scholars pretty much agree this is not an actual letter from Paul's own hand or pen. It was written in his name and in his style, probably after he died. I don't hide that from you because it just doesn't hurt you to know the scholarship. It also doesn't hurt any of us to read the letter exactly as it was intended. We'll enter into a little bit of literary fiction here to see this as the imprisoned Paul, an older guy, at the end of his life and ministry, giving his last lecture to a beloved pupil and mentee named Timothy. What we can say for sure is this letter is concerned with what continues after us. What is the heritage we pass along? And that way, that what continues is the same answer for us today. So whoever this author was, he wants us to read the letter as a reflection that is like his his last best lecture. You know, it's like a Tuesdays with Morrie, if you're familiar with that book. Here he speaks at the end of his life, and I'll read us the opening verses 3-8 of 2 Timothy. Timothy, I thank God for you, the God I serve with a clear conscience, just as my ancestors did. Night and day, I constantly remember you in my prayers. I long to see you again, for I remember your tears when we parted, and I will be filled with joy when we are together again. I remember your genuine faith, for you share the faith that first filled your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I know that same faith continues strong in you. This is why I remind you to fan into flames the spiritual gift God gave you when I laid my hands on you. For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. So never be ashamed to tell others about the Lord, and don't be ashamed of me either, even though I'm in prison for him. With the strength God gives you, be ready to suffer with me for the sake of the good news. It's fear we're talking about today in our ongoing examination of love. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, friends. Even in the suffering we will do, like Paul, to uphold and increase God's good news. One really big idea you need to grasp that stands behind this letter is kind of the combined wisdom of all Paul's letters. Paul, here and everywhere, is not out to terrify people into following Christ. He was never threatening hell. No matter how we read Romans and the wages of sin is death, Paul knew something about death. He knew that was the state people were already in as they lived without experiencing the fullness of the limitless love of God. Paul was offering people another way that would bring fuller life while alive. And this is a summation of the very best stuff Paul came up with and came to over time. It's a promise from God and no threat. The Spirit of God, the Spirit that God gives ordinary people is of love. There is not fear in that Spirit. So even if we get pretty close to the Spirit of love, but just miss the basket by a few inches, we're pretty far off. We've missed a lot. Because the way of Jesus cannot be supported by, motivated by, defended by, or justified by the way of fear. It's just not the same spirit. They diverge. Our way is not that. Even though fear is a really basic and common human emotion, it's not the way we're called to interact with the other humans. English doesn't have a direct equivalent to the Greek word. It's an ancient Greek word that's used right here in 2 Timothy. It's really the only time that exact word shows up in the New Testament. It's similar to trembling or anxiety. And it was often used commonly as part of a phrase. Not this, but that. it contrasted one state of being to a totally different state of being. And the different state was moving in confidence, moving in boldness. So that phrase, not a spirit of fear, is bigger than any legitimate time we are afraid. It's not saying never be afraid, because we know we're going to need to be afraid sometimes. That is allowed. Self-preservation is such a strong instinct given to us for good purpose. Sometimes our fears, they take care of us when we're in dangerous or damaging situations. So it's no breach of faith with God that we get scared for very real reasons. Sometimes we're under threat, and fear is our natural reaction. But fear here is bigger. The idea of the word, it's bigger than any one instance of being afraid. Bigger than the feelings we get. It's more speaking about what we do next after we have a feeling. It's not our first reaction to a real threat, but the continued state of being that we enter into when we feel threatened. It's allowing ourselves to be guided by that feeling. It's getting familiar with a certain way, keeping it around us because it's comfortable. I would say that kind of fear, which is a defense we build and wear, is not of God. It's antithetical to the spirit of love God gives us. And it too easily becomes a stance people take in life. Sometimes it's a stance that looks good. Sometimes, often, this stance appears strong. We call it things like risk aversion and real-world common sense. But when it becomes our default way of thinking about people, it's in fact a certain lack of confidence in God. It's no longer a strength. It's the absence of the Jesus way. Because now we can't lean into that way or act freely from it. If we're suspicious, if we're judgmental, if we write off huge portions of the population, the spirit of fear will limit us. It will keep us from stepping out in love whenever we sense that love is a risk. Because as in the case of the Good Samaritan, it often is. Sometimes we know our love is not likely to be returned. Sometimes we believe our compassion is going to lead to our very own suffering. And sometimes we choose that because we're choosing suffering in the way of the good news. That is strength, actual, real strength to choose that kind of love. And it's the only way early Christians could exist in the world. They had to have this different kind of spirit about them. They had to leave behind what they had known. Their spirit, as the letter says, was one of power, love, and self-discipline, just to keep existing under the constant threat of persecution. The threat of physical harm or death by the state of Rome, or at the very least, under this heavy pressure to just conform back to who they were before Jesus, just to give up the radicalness of this life in common they had chosen. An understanding of fear as a spirit and not just a single feeling, that would have been really relevant to the early church. That would have made total sense to them because any one of Jesus's early followers would have felt real fear. They would have lived with fears. They would have been afraid and also found a way to stand their ground. Solidly, 2 feet down, 10 toes to the ground, beyond all their fears. Or they would have abandoned the way. I believe they stayed because they fanned the flames of something that was already inside them. Just like this advice in the letter. I think there was something in them that was helpful to overcome every natural tendency to draw in, to be more self-protective and small. And I think that this letter serves to remind all the Timothys out there, the ones at the time and the ones of us now, anyone who has inherited faith in Jesus, that we carry something in us bigger than fear. God's own Spirit is in us, and it always has been more than our circumstances. Let this Spirit do its work in you, advises the last lecture, the accumulated wisdom. This is why I remind you to fan into flames the spiritual gift God gave you when I laid my hands on you. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love. There's another place in the New Testament where love gets directly contrasted with fear. It's in 1 John 4. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. That's the verse that kind of inspired the lyrics of one of the songs we sang today. For fear has to do with punishment, 1 John says, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. We love because he first loved us. Reading those verses, I think, adds something to our letter. If perfect love, as in divine love or Christ's love, casts out fear, then I'm going to wonder, is the reverse also true? Is the opposite statement also reality, that fear casts out love? That tracks for me, because I think I've felt it. I think I've felt how allowing myself to dwell in fear leaves a lot less room for love to move around. There's no space for love to indwell. It limits how I'm able to interact with the world, how I'm moved to reach out to the world. So it's worth saying, because this is just reality. A whole lot of us feel fear right now. We're in a fearful place. We feel fear about future days and years in the United States, and we do this for a lot of different reasons. Whether we think that a needed course correction towards personal liberty is happening right now, or whether we think a gutting of essential safeguards to democracy are happening right now. Both those states are anxiety-inducing. We have real human reasons to fear, mostly because we can't seem to talk to each other across these huge divides, mostly because we seem to blame and villainize each other. We are a threat to each other right now as a nation. But into that reality speaks this wisdom of the way. Into that reality, we hear this reminder: the kind of love we're called to live, it is not a threat. It is not a threat to us. No matter what else it questions or challenges or changes in the world, God's love is not a threat to our souls. It is a good promise. The Spirit God gives is a promise made and kept just for us so that we can exist in whatever time we're in whatever division and difficulty we're in. This love helps us get past the picking of a side into the staying in the way, remaining in love's way. Is it going to cost us a lot to live this kind of love? Yes. Will it be difficult to be these kind of gospel people in any age? Just because no human age yet has ordered itself according to kingdom values? Yeah, that is absolutely true, now and always. If we're the kind of people who can see the gaps human society has let others fall through, we're going to suffer trying to close the gaps. But to follow Jesus, to do the work of love, we're going to have to choose that kind of suffering a little bit more. We're going to have to lean not into a spirit of fear, but the spirit of love. They diverge. And where they do lies the real power and the discipline not to shrink or turn away from what's so hard and yet feels impossible right now. But beloveds of Christ, friends of God, faithful community, we were built to do hard things. We were called to do this hard thing. Leaning into this way, it's not a threat. It's a gift. It's a gift. And there's a promise that God's with us in it. It's our calling. It's our inheritance. It is our way, our chosen way, to live unafraid. So may it be among us.